மாதந்தோறும் ஆணையர் அவர்களின் வழிகாட்டுதலின்படி மிகச்சிறப்பாக நடைபெற்று கொண்டிருக்கின்ற திங்கட்பொழிவு கூட்டத்தில் தொல்லியல், கல்வெட்டியல், கலை மற்றும் வரலாறு என பல்வேறு தலைப்புகளில் அறிஞர் பெருமக்கள் வருகை புரிந்து தங்களது கருத்துக்களை பகிர்ந்து கொண்டு வருகின்றனர். அவ்வகையில் இன்று புதிய நோக்கில் தமிழக தொல்பழங்கால வரலாறு என்ற தலைப்பில் சிறப்புரையாற்ற வருகை புரிந்துள்ள பேராசிரியர் சாந்தி பப்பு, முனைவர் குமார் அகிலேஷ் சர்மா பாரம்பரிய கல்வி மையம் வருகை புரிந்துள்ளனர். அவர்களின் பற்றி சிறிய அறிமுக உரை. Professor Shanti Papu is the founder of Sharma Center for Higher Heritage Education and a former professor of prehistory at the Deccan College. She is a corresponding fellow of the British Academy. She is directing and co-directing projects on the prehistory of Tamil Nadu with Dr. Kumar Agilesh. She completed her PhD from the Deccan College and subsequently obtaining a Homi Baba Fellowship. She was an awardee of Charles Wallace Fellow at the Ancient India and Iran Trust, United Kingdom. She has obtained several awards including the Professor H.T. Sankalia Gold Medal from the Deccan College and Young Scientist Award from the Earth Watch Institute, the USA. She holds a law degree with dissertation on cultural heritage laws of India and is a registered advocate. She has published 2 books with numerous publications in reputed journals including Science and Nature, also 1 book for children on archaeology and several popular articles. She in outreach in the field of archaeology for children, teachers and for people interested in the subject. Welcome, ma'am. Dr. Kumar Akhilesh is the director of Sharma for Heritage Education. He has a PhD from the Deccan College, Pune, under Professor V.N. Misra. Over 20 years, he has dedicated his work to investigating prehistory archaeology of Tamil Nadu. He is currently directing and co-directing on prehistory and paleo-environment at Athirampakkam and is the director of research project on investigating prehistoric sites in Tamil Nadu. Dr. Akhilesh is interested in prehistory, experimental archaeology, especially ethnic mapping, satellite remote sensing and GIS. He was developed thematic maps using satellite remote sensing and field investigation under ISRO GBP project in collaboration with ISRO, Indian Space Research Organization, and RRC, Research Center for Remote Sensing South. Dr. Akhilesh was also a Homi Baba Fellowship. His specialized interest are the experimental archaeology reconstructing the Asian technology, for which he completed advanced courses in lithic technology from France under the guidance of Professor P.J. Texier, J. Pellegrin and other experts in the field. His area of expertise is stone tool technology and he is currently involved in the analysis of artifacts from Athirampakkam and other sites in Tamil Nadu. He is the director and program on experimental replication of technologies used by Acheulean and Middle Paleolithic hominins at Athirampakkam. He has numerous research papers in reputed national and international journals to his credit, including Science and Nature, and has presented in his conferences in India and abroad. He is on editorial board of international peer-reviewed journal Archaeological Discovery. Welcome, sir. And I would like to welcome all other aspirants and students to this session. Thank you.
So good afternoon. Firstly, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude and thanks to the Department of Archaeology, State Government of Tamil Nadu for having invited us here. Professor Shivanandan, Bhagyalakshmi Madam, so many other people are here. I'm very grateful to them. They have always given us the utmost help and support, which is why we have been able to do all these projects over all these years. Without this, it would not have been possible. So many students from the department, staff members have also visited the sites where we are working, visited us, and I am very grateful. Many are here in the audience, and I'm very grateful to all of them here. So today, Akhilesh and I are going to talk on a slightly different topic, that is, where are we heading in prehistoric research in Tamil Nadu and in general in India also. It's very, very related. So this is our topic. I think this is a pointer. 1 second. Yeah. Oh, put off my alarm. Okay. At the end of the talk, there are 2 small videos, and what we will do is we will run a little bit of the video. There won't be time for the whole thing, but you can see it online. Both of them are online. So that will give you some more idea of the work. So why are we talking about new perspectives? So one of the reasons is where I have marked 3 circles over here, that is areas where we are working either alone or in collaboration with the state government. And what we want to look at is very old data in new light. So that's why I have put the topic new perspectives, because we are constantly evolving and constantly redefining the ways in which we are trying to work. For example, the aims which we started off in 1999 or even earlier for my PhD or early work are obviously constantly being updated and thought about. So that's why this topic. Why prehistory? All of you in the audience know that it's so important, not only in terms of looking at common human origins and the complexity of the story of why we are like what we are today, but also in terms of obviously our behavioral evolution, the human niche, and how we have adapted to different types of this very dramatic climate change, both in the past, in the present, and it's going to be really important for the future as well. And of course, thinking about the future and the relevance of prehistory when we are discussing not only what we are like now, how we have got to be what we are like, and where we are headed. So in all these ways, it's very, very important. So just a recap for those who are perhaps not familiar with the discipline. When we consider what is taught in schools today or in colleges, most of us look only at the tip of the iceberg. Whereas the period we are talking about is this really huge time period called the Pleistocene, and a little bit of the early Holocene beginning around 12,000 years ago, where most of these dramatic changes and shifts in human evolution have occurred. So that's what we are going to look at. Obviously, this is set in the context of dramatic climate change. And in India especially, we are concerned with changes in the monsoons and sea level changes and associated impacts on fauna, on vegetation, etc. And the story of human evolution. So even though we do not have fossils, we have a wonderful heritage of stone tools in Tamil Nadu. And this has been known, as I'll show you, way back from 1866. So that's really, really important. So what am I going to look at? I'm going to look at landscapes, entire broad regions, move to sites which we are working at, stone tools, and discuss this in aspects of chronology and environments. So this is a broad outline. And the time period we'll be discussing starts from the lower Paleolithic Acheulean and goes on to the Neolithic, which is our current project. Sir and Madam are here, and we'll talk a little bit about that. All of us are grateful to Robert Brucefoot, who established the science of the Paleolithic, at least in Tamil Nadu. We are very proud it started here and then spread all over India. But also, we have a wonderful long trajectory of research. So this is something very rare to have in one region, right from 1866 onwards, so many different approaches towards examining prehistory. Through time, different concepts, different methodologies, different ways of thinking about our prehistoric past, not only in Tamil Nadu but also in India as a whole. But what is important is that many of the concepts which got picked up in Indian prehistory, say the Madrasian or Madras hand axe tradition, all these cultural taxonomies and terminology started here. And some articles we are writing which will come out this year, which look at the history of research with some of these terms. So on the positive side, in India and in Tamil Nadu, we have a very, very good background in terms of the high density of sites. We often take this for granted. But when you go abroad, you really realize that our sites in India, and especially around Tamil Nadu, are so rich with stone tools, with so much diversity, spatio-temporal diversity, long records. It's really a wonderful heritage. On the negative side, we have very few sites which are excavated in prehistory. Of course, that is being picked up now, but overall. And we need obviously more dates and more records about the environment. So some of the new perspectives which we need to think about is simple things like terminologies we use. If you see this sort of very simple schematic drawing over here, this is from the 1950s, 60s onwards, and this is today. So you can see that although we use the terms lower, middle, upper Paleolithic, Mesolithic, this is commonly used, but it's not static in the sense that through time different scholars have chosen different ways of classifying prehistoric cultures. This might seem like a very simple, useless point, but it's very important. Why is it important? Because it defines and structures the way we think about cultures and the way we think about cultural change. So for example, if you see the last one here, the upper and Mesolithic are sometimes just grouped into a late Paleolithic. So these are dynamic ways of thinking which are constantly evolving, and we need to rethink the way we perceive the past. Similarly, cultural change. When we are saying lower, middle, upper, Neolithic, whatever it may be, why does culture change occur? What are the processes leading to culture change? So generally we like to think of cultures in boxes or pots, because it's India, I put pots, but it doesn't really work that way. And if you remove these, you will see that there are some aspects of continuity in terms of certain technologies, tool types, etc. Some areas of abrupt appearance and disappearance. So this whole process of the way in which transitions occur is something which we really need to dig into greater depth. I'll talk about this more in context of our own work. Next is past environments. We have actually the very sparse data because of preservation issues. So whatever data we are getting, so for example, these plant remains like phytoliths or some fossil elements, whatever it is, they are very, very crucial in building a bridge between what we get in terms of environmental data in the past and how we are interpreting it in terms of human adaptation or hominin adaptation, whatever the case may be. So some of the factors which need to be considered, say, are the rates of climate change versus adaptation to them, or something called the Red Queen hypothesis, or how these local or wider ecological niches are constructed. So all these questions, we have a long way to go before we are able to get any answers. Fourthly, reconciling genetic, archaeological and fossil data. This is one of our big issues. It's very popular in media to speak of migration of populations and diffusion, etc., etc. But the answer is not so simple. Sometimes there is a sort of a disconnect between these beautiful maps with lot of arrows going all over the place and the actual hard archaeological data which you are getting, and also the fossil data which may come from somewhere else in the world. So sometimes there are many different stories coming out of all this, and reconciling them has been one of the major issues in Indian or South Asian prehistory, with a lot of debate on that. So for example, we know that we have in India, right from a very early date at Atharampakam and other sites, the earliest Acheulean, or one of the earliest Acheuleans, which has significant implications when we think of dispersals out of Africa. And I'll come back to this point a little earlier. This is only one example, but it carries on through time. Next, the spread or the transition from hunting-gathering modes of life to agro-pastoralism, or what we call the Neolithic, or the process of a major shift in the way people are interacting with their environments and cultivating crops and domesticating animals. This is still a long way to go in understanding. We have a joint project with the State Department, and we have begun in a very small way to examine some of these questions, to look at issues related to technology, to chronology, and then to look at the type of crops and animals domesticated. There's a long way to go in this, but it's a very, very important problem, because as compared to the neighboring states, say Andhra, Karnataka, we need a lot more data on this cultural phase in this region. Of course, chronologies. Where do we stand? Now, I have put just Acheulean, just some of the lower Paleolithic dated sites on this map, and as you can see, there are very few dots. And in Atharampakam, we have managed to get some good dates, and then these are other sites. So this is a huge issue, because it's an issue because many of these sites are extremely difficult to date. They occur in sediments which may not be datable at all. So whenever we get something which can be dated, we are really lucky, and we have to exploit that to the maximum. Diving deep into stone tools. So as you all know, the time for just classifying tools into types, hand axe, cleaver, that is over. And now we are, as you can see here, Akhilesh looking through a microscope to examine some of the edges of stone tools to figure out what their function is in collaboration with colleagues, or also to dive deeper into understanding tools and moving from the simple stone tool into aspects of cognition, into aspects of prehistoric behavior, and so many questions can be asked. So this is something which we really are doing now, and which are coming up with very, very interesting results. Theoretical issues. This is a common issue all over India. On one side, you have all the data, or whether you're excavating something or whatever it may be. And on the other side, to construct pictures of the past, or construct hypotheses about how people behaved in the past, after factoring issues of taphonomy, that is the way the sites are formed, or the processes influencing artifacts or bones or whatever it may be at sites, and to work within a very strong theoretical framework. This is something which is really very important and is often not considered to the extent it should be. Obviously, the theoretical or conceptual issues which we are dealing with in archaeology, whatever your choice of what to adopt as a theoretical framework may be, it will obviously influence your methodologies and structure your entire research. So whether it is in terms of excavations or surveys or sampling, both across regions or within sites, or deciding whole lot of other factors, that is obviously arising from the conceptual framework you are beginning with. And this is something which we need to really work on in great detail when we are planning long-term research projects. The last two are public outreach and science communication. So this is a video, it's not running, but I'll show it at the end. So it's not only important to publish in books, but as has been done in Tamil Nadu, for example, in the projects at Kiradi and other sites, you have constantly addressed and brought in the public. And this is what has made archaeology so dynamic in this area. And that is very important, not merely to publish in research journals, but also to take that knowledge out to anyone who is interested in it. And this is what makes, I think, the subject come alive and create a sustainable future. Similarly with heritage management and conservation. So how do you plan to conserve these sites which are very different from monuments or structures? They are nothing but a scatter of stone tools, bones in some very fragile sediments. So the way in which you have to plan for conservation or funding or whatever it may be to sustain this heritage for the future requires a different way of thinking and a different approach, and this is something which has been thought about in many parts of the world, and it has a lot of potential to be implemented in India. So this whole process of long-term planning, to have research projects which don't run for a few years but which think in terms of 5 or 10 year strategies, in which you have certain outcomes and then you work towards achieving certain goals. Obviously your research goals will change along the way as you make new discoveries, you will change your strategies, but it's a long-term thinking for the benefit of this particular subject in any particular region across India. Okay, so with that introduction, I will now come to our work, and then we'll just quickly go through the way in which we have been looking at all these issues. So obviously you know that we are working in parts, I will just focus a bit on northern Tamil Nadu and the deep south. And our aims were very diverse, ranging from looking at very vast landscapes and scales of adaptation across these landscapes, down to the site, trenches and artifacts. So it's a constant cycle between looking at things at different scales, spatial and temporal. And because of that, your ideas and your strategies also vary when you're looking at different research questions. So in this particular project, I'll just give some few examples. You can see all these dots here are sites, and this area is around 8,000 square kilometers. So all these little dots are sites, and this is where we are focusing our first stage of the project. So when we are examining these, I'll first look at landscapes. When we are examining these very, very vast landscapes with, as you can see here, different geomorphological zones, different types of geology, different processes occurring here, obviously our survey and sampling strategies and the methodologies by which we are going to address getting an adequate sample from a very vast region have to be thought about constantly. So whether it is devising sampling strategies which may be transects over vast regions, or which may be other methods which we are using, or test pits, or use of satellite remote sensing, or even predictive modeling. So I'll come to this little later, but it's a way of quickly getting to the sites in question. Or even looking at GPR, ground penetrating radar, which has been done here. All these strategies are used in sort of along with each other to be able to get a sample size on which we can base some reliable conclusions about. So based on that, you have so many sites all across this small area of 8,000 square kilometers. Many of the sites obviously were discovered by Robert Bruce Foote, by pioneers like V.D. Krishnaswamy, by K.D. Banerjee, by the State Department people, by Professor Rajan and his students. So it is, what we did was we revisited many of these sites which were still there and generated these huge databases of information, not only on the stone tools, but on the stratigraphy, on the context of the sites, geomorphology, geology, etc. So, for example, now if you zoom in, and this is just a 10 by 10 kilometer area, you have all these yellow dots are prehistoric sites occurring in different geomorphological and stratigraphic contexts. So some of these you know already, these key sites, Atrampakam, Sendra and Palyam, etc., where we are now focusing our main attention. So this comes to another level of deciding which sites to focus attention on. So you have hundreds of sites, which ones are you going to pick? So this again was based on certain research questions which we wanted to answer, and then accordingly we selected after surveys the best possible sites which we believe can give us some answers to these questions. So these, as I mentioned, these multi-pronged survey strategies were adopted here, and even utilizing ground penetrating radar, not for looking at stone tools at all, but for picking up the type of sediments that we were interested in a non-destructive way. And then we could narrow down on other procedures to be followed. We used, in collaboration with RRSC South, predictive modeling, which means that in a GIS environment, we could write certain sort of programs to be able to quickly identify areas which were of interest to us to find sites, which we believed we had a good possibility of finding sites of a particular time period. And then based on the models generated arising from these strategies, we could go and test our model in unknown areas to see whether we could find sites rapidly or not, and it worked. So this is all published. So it gives you a very quick way to be able to survey and find sites when you have a lack of time and money. So this model worked well, and we are working to devise new models to look at sites of other time periods. This is only for the Paleolithic, but for the Neolithic or for later time periods, similar models can be used to quickly locate sites, because as you know, everyone works on a very short time duration, and you have to maximize the ability to use that time. So all these sites are found in diverse geomorphological zones. So all these colors on the map indicate some geology formations. I won't go into details, but ranging from fluvio-lacustrine to colluvial to regolithic contexts, these sites are in different contexts, and that's important because it tells you not only about different environmental changes through time, but also about the integrity of sites. So obviously sites which are in some contexts have a higher degree of preservation, and therefore more worthy of our attention rather than sites in other contexts. So all these variables are always factored into our research before we even think of excavation. Similarly, on regional scales, you can map raw materials. As you see here, all these different colors are all different sources of rocks. And out of these sources, say for the Acheulean, during the lower Paleolithic, only certain areas here in this top region was selected, and that is really important because it tells you something, that through time, not only how different sources of raw material changed, sometimes they were exposed and available, sometimes they were buried, but the decisions made by Homo erectus or by later hominins in choosing certain sources for at that particular time period. So we have great variability, right from quartzites, which predominate here, to chert, to even silicified wood in certain areas down here. Through time, different choices were made, and this gives us more insights into the minds of the tool makers. And right now, more provenance studies are going on regarding this. When I come to the Neolithic, I'll discuss that. Similarly, there is variability in the size of sites, in density and assemblage composition. Say, just take the Acheulean for example, only the Acheulean. Some areas have these large giant cores, huge, they're really big. And some areas don't have any, like Athrampakam, in the lowermost level, there are no cores at all. So you can actually see the way in which these people, Acheulean hominins, are using the landscape in different ways through time. So in some areas they were making the tools, then they were carrying them, and that's something like a fragmented reduction sequence, or the way in which they organize their behavior across the landscape. This can be done for all time periods. So now if we zoom down to the sites, let's start with some of the sites we are working at. And one important issue is anybody who has been to Atrampakam will see this on the surface. Lots of tools eroding out on the top and underneath. And right from Robert Brucefoot onwards, people have collected hand axes and cleavers because they look good. So everyone has picked them up and collected them. But the problem is that when you are looking at sites like this, which are deeply stratified, buried with many, many layers, multicultural, you have tools eroding on the surface from different time periods. And so whatever judgments you make from the surface collection is bound to be wrong. This is the problem. I myself, when I did my PhD, I struggled to understand this site. I did my PhD on this site, one of the many sites, and when I collected tools from the site at that time, I found that they didn't match each other. They were completely looking very different. Now after excavation, we realize the reason why. So we have to be very cautious in interpreting surface collections. And this is an important problem because in India, most of our sample comes from surface scatters. So in this context, when we are studying Athirampakkam now, in addition to earlier work, very recently we did this GPR surveys, ground penetrating surveys across the area. You can see here, so that we can get a very good idea about subsurface variability in the different sediments. So as you know, in any landscape, it will not be flat. There will be ups and downs. So how do we know what is an up, what is a down? How do we know what the old landscape surfaces looked like? Today you are seeing it at present is very different. So this helped us a lot in trying to understand that. Of course, in the excavations which we did at Athirampakkam and now Sendra and Palyam, a number of techniques and new methodologies were devised once again based on our theoretical approaches and research questions. So for example, at Athirampakkam, every trench was excavated with a different question in mind. Whatever methods we have used, for example, photogrammetry, this is at Sendra and Palyam, or total station, use of a total station for plotting each individual artifact and cultural feature. So you generate maps on site and therefore you can plan your strategies better. Or sieving everything, every single bit of sediment is sieved to recover everything less than 2 centimeters. Whatever strategies are planned, these are our aims. So to achieve a certain objective, you devise your research methodology. Then, for example, at Athirampakkam, what we found were these very, very deep, thick stratified levels. For a prehistoric site, this is quite amazing. And you get similar sites in elsewhere in India as well. But for Tamil Nadu, this is really a very interesting sequence with the Acheulean at the base and then some processes leading to the transition and to a middle Paleolithic. So you can see the different colored sediments here are reflective of changing environmental conditions and fluvial mechanics through time at this site. And then, finally, for some reason, the site was abandoned by prehistoric populations and then they just went somewhere else in the region. So if you look at the oldest levels, you will see here more than 9 meters thick deposit, and throughout this deposit there are these tools. And what's really interesting is that Robert Brucefoot and everybody up to 1960s said that these deposits were Cretaceous, that is very, very old, and therefore there was no tools in them. But when K.D. Banerjee excavated the site, he had a suspicion that the Acheulean occurred here at this top, and he wrote that down. When we went to excavate the site, we found, based on the help of the local villagers of that area, they said that if you want to find in the Madri Periya hand axe, Periyakal, if you want, you have to dig down. So for the first time, we could identify more than 9 meters as representative of the Pleistocene, and later we could date it. So whatever it is, these levels are very, very well preserved. How do we know that? From studies in site formation and for the presence of tools which are conjoinable. That means sometime in the past they broke, but they were lying there somewhere in the sediment, and today you can join them together, which means that it has not been affected much by major fluvial action. Obviously, every site has some disturbance. No prehistoric site in India is 100% primary, 100% undisturbed. There is always some disturbance, but you have to grade it. So we could, as you all know, date the site, and it is dated with both paleomagnetic and beryllium cosmogenic nuclide burial dating to around 1.07 to 1.7, mean around 1.5. So that became very important for several reasons. One is that it was dated by two methods, and most people accept that date. And it is very similar to sites in Africa and Israel which are of a similar age. So what does that mean? That people began talking about the significance of the nature and timing of dispersal of Homo erectus from Africa to India. So this became, because till then the Indian Acheulean was considered by some people to be very young, not so old, though people like Dr. Sheila Mishra and others had been arguing for the antiquity of the Acheulean. Many did not believe it, but this was quite conclusive. Not only that, it helps us get a date to look at evolutionary trajectories. What does that mean? If the Acheulean changes through time, now we can put some dates and look at those changes. And also local adaptations. So at this early date in Tamil Nadu, what were they using? How did they adapt to the environment? What rocks did they prefer? What was their behavior like? We can now put a date to it. So that is also very important. Paleo environments. We have very few fossils, but instead of complaining about that fact, you have to literally extract other evidence of past environments. So with our colleagues from French Institute and many other places, we have excellent colleagues who are working on environmental studies, and in Sri Lanka also, everywhere. So what they have been able to do is extract things called phytoliths, that is some plant fossils, and also work on geochemistry, on mineral magnetics and other aspects from the sediment itself. So from that, they have been able to construct these sequences of looking at changes in monsoon patterns, changes in aridity, vegetation through time. And a colleague, Dr. Gunel from France, who's been working on the geomorphology of the region, has been able to build up models of what the landscape would have been like and how it has changed in the past. So a lake and then a river. And today if you go, there's no major river there. There's no lake there. But at that time, there would have been very, very different local environments. So you can now start, when you think about this in relation to the tools, you can now start putting together a picture of what people were doing at this site in the lower Paleolithic, in the Acheulean. So in the Acheulean levels, there is no raw material. It's all this, and I'll come back to this image, it's all this very, very fine-grained silt and clay, like any river or lake bed, lake channel. There is no pebbles, no cobbles, no boulders. How did they make the tools? Because you get all these tools there. So what did they do? So we now know that somewhere in the region, away from the site, they exploited these large boulders and cobbles which you see. When you go towards the Alikuli Hills and other areas, you will see all these conglomerates, these beds of cobbles, boulders, pebbles. They exploited that. Then they made these large flakes, very big flakes. They carried that to the site. So you can already see, even at around 1.5 million years ago, there is so much predetermined planning and anticipation for use. So you are another species, don't forget that. And you are planning, you are carrying these large flakes to the site and some unfinished hand axes. You are making all these tools, hand axe, cleavers, whatever it is, at the site. Because you are making tools at the site, you are getting a lot of waste products, which we get lots, thousands of these pieces of tiny flakes, which are all rubbish actually, waste, from manufacturing waste. But because of raw material shortage at the site, they are not discarding this waste, but they are retouching and reusing and making them into small tools. So everything is used. Obviously they are using the tools and then they are discarding them. At the same time, they are also bringing some tools on cobbles. And then what are they doing? They are carrying away things also from the site. If you have so much tool use, you would expect to find hammer stones to make the tools, but you don't find anything there. So as anybody who likes napping like Akhilesh here, he always prefers to keep his own hammerstone with him. So we can anticipate that some degree of curation of bifaces and hammerstones was being made. Oops. Sir, it has not come. Okay. I think there's one slide, the animation has not come. Akhilesh, we'll come back to this. So whatever it is, in addition to Athirampakam, and I won't go into the details of the lithic technology here, we also, one site, as you know, cannot give you all the answers. And therefore, it is very necessary for us to look at what was happening in a regional scale. So if you have one manifestation of the Acheulean which occurs at the site of Athirampakam, there are other types of behavior of the same time period which are reflected at other sites. And this is exactly what we are doing in recent excavations with our colleagues at CNA at the site of Sendra and Palyam, where we are again picking up a lower Paleolithic assemblage, again in a very stratified context, but with a technology and with raw materials which reflect completely different strategies. So this is something of great interest when we are looking at comparative studies in the behavior of a species across a region. Okay, so this is something we are exploring in greater detail. Now, when you come to the late Paleolithic and microlithic assemblages of Tamil Nadu, you have a major change occurring. So I think there is a problem with the slides, Akhilesh. Some of the slides have not come up. May I stop 1 minute and just check? No, please go back. You go into the slide view and go back, please. So anyway, while that is being sorted out, there's the few slides which seem to have hung are issues which occurred towards the end of the Acheulean and the transition to the Middle Paleolithic. So this is also something which we have picked up at the site of Athirampakam, and it's really very important because in this case, when we dated this transition from the Acheulean to the succeeding assemblages which are termed middle, we got very early dates ranging from around 380 plus minus 60 to around 172,000. And the technology which is reflected in these levels and in these these sediments reflects a very, very complex story of two major phases. One phase in which you have some degree of processes indicative of a transition from the large flake Acheulean to something very different. So these large flakes slowly start being discarded, and you have the appearance of new technologies such as the Levallois and small flake tools and other aspects which come up. And then finally, you have the complete abandonment of tools like hand axes and cleavers and a complete shift to what is a typical Indian Middle Paleolithic assemblage. What does this mean? Again, it means that the theories, we need to rethink many of our theories on how these processes of culture change occurred and what it means in terms of dispersal of populations with a Middle Paleolithic technology. Some say modern humans, some say someone else. It doesn't really matter. We don't know because we don't have the fossils. All we can say is that when this change occurred, there is both something which is internally evolving and being developed locally, as well as some external extrinsic influences. So this whole process of the debate of cultural transitions, again from Tamil Nadu, we are getting very wonderful evidence. We need more sites of this time period to be excavated, to be studied, to be analyzed before we can put it together, the story in a better way. But at least we have made a beginning in this, in looking at this complex question of cultural change and transitions. Similarly, when you come to the late Paleolithic and the microlithic assemblage, next please. Okay, I can do it from here. So there are these sites all over the state. It's not that we have only in certain pockets, but in our own research, When we explored this particular area in the deep south, which you are all know are very famous for these terry sediments, but not only the terries but also around them, there are all these rich microlithic assemblages which are found there, and which occur in sediments which are very similar to those which you find in certain parts of Sri Lanka. So a lot of studies have been done in this area right from the 19th century onwards, and more recently by a number of geologists. So they have worked extensively on these sediments, they have dated them, and they have got some idea of the processes which involve both sea level changes and variability in the monsoon, to be able to understand how they form and how the weathering patterns occur here, etc. But we know very little about what is the actual association of these tools in relation to these terry dune formations, and also we know very little about what is the technology which is going on and how it compares with that occurring in Sri Lanka. So that is what we are currently working on, and we are trying to understand this particular assemblage of microlithic tools and look at it in terms of not only the sediments in which they occur, but to get some dates and to correlate this with the stratigraphies built up by geologists. Lastly, when we move from hunting gathering to agro-pastoral modes of life, as I said earlier, this is the so-called Neolithic, and in this ongoing project there are many research questions which we are at present not very confident of answering with the data we have at hand. And therefore, in this new project in collaboration, we have firstly begun with generation of the large databases of what is available information which has been reported through time. After this, we proceeded to go and survey certain select areas where they are which have been very well known from a long time period, again from the time of Robert Bruce Foote, as areas of potential celt manufacture. So there was some debate as to whether this was a manufacturing area of Neolithic cells or whether it's some other time period. But based on the fieldwork which our team, madam is here, sir is there, and other students also came with us. So based on some key sites, we were able to actually map in great detail and study the not only the sedimentary context of the site where these extensive rich occurrences of cells in early stages of manufacture were noted, but also follow up on areas which had been reported by previous scholars of where there were grinding stones, and then also look at the final cells which were in the museum and their reuse in local ritual contexts. So I will just mention this first slide over here because this paper is still in review and we hope it will get published soon. But what is really important here is that we were able to look at the very unique data of a manufacturing area. Most of us like to study this final beautiful celt. It looks really nice. But for us, this was more important because we could actually deconstruct different methods of making these celts, right from the selection of suitable dolerite slabs to decisions made as to what to do, whether to make it in a particular way, why it was discarded, and then subsequent manufacturing stages leading to the final polished feature we see today. Again, this is important because it didn't all occur at one place. So you have, for example, you have the raw material sources, which are these dolerite dikes, where most of the preliminary stages of celt production were focused, and then you have subsequent areas where these pieces were carried to later for grinding, as you can see in these different grinding grooves, and then for use elsewhere and discard. So together this gives you a very good perspective again of land use for this particular time period. We don't have dates for now, but this is a study which is just beginning. Already the raw material has gone for provenance studies, so we will be able to narrow that down further, but it gives us an insight into the technological behavior of these early farming and pastoral groups in this particular region. So this is another important aspect of the trajectory of our work. Heritage management. This, as you all know, is very, very important, and it has been done in terms of more spectacular structures, monuments and sculptures and the like. What we did was we worked with ISRO, and using a combination of satellite remote sensing and field data, we were able to map exactly the land use occurring at most of the prehistoric sites over 8,000 square kilometers area. This told us in numbers, quantitative data, as to what is the area occupied by different things, for example, agriculture or urbanization or whatever it may be, and then allowed us to build up strategies by which we could think about individual conservation schemes required for sites. Say, for example, no, it should be protected fully, or areas where salvage was good enough, or areas where you could still use the site just for teaching purposes and nothing more, or for environmental reasons, for paleo-environmental studies and the like. So whatever it is, this is also an aspect which must be seriously factored into any research project. Safe storage of artifacts. This is also published, so you can access this article in the journal Antiquity. And to devise, Akhilesh devised a system where we created a database by which, and storage system, which is the details of which you can read online, by which within a few minutes you can actually recover any artifact of your interest. So whatever the number, whatever the count, whatever it may be, if you want something within a few seconds, you can actually locate it, you can recover it. There is a system for recording who's taking it out, who's putting it back. So this is also something essential for a long-term research project and for planning for the security of whatever you are excavating. Public outreach. For this we have 2 films, but I'll just share the links with you and you can see them online. And this we believe is really, really very important, because especially we have been looking at school children and talking to school children over from 1999 onwards, because it is they who are the custodians of the future, and it is with them developing an awareness of prehistory that you can actually hope for some conservation in the distant future. So this is one very important aspect of our work. I think the PowerPoint is not working, so the last few slides are actually acknowledgements. And yes, Akhilesh, yes. So before that, can you please go before that? Yeah. So I think that is the videos which are not showing up, but please go to the next one. So we have these 3 videos. We will share the links with you or play them online, a little bit of each of them next. So these videos are made either in-house by our interns. 2 of our interns are here today, and they are also working on simple explanatory videos, posters for students. Next, please. Okay, yeah. And educational films on specific aspects of technology, which are for more serious scholars of prehistory. So ultimately, we need to think about, in Tamil Nadu at least, we need to think about dates, about obviously more excavations, and about debates. So the 3 Ds, as you may call it. And when planning for the future, to devise very long-term systematic strategies which are not sort of ending after 3 years, but maybe 10 years, 20 years projects, in which there is a constant evolution of ideas and a constant factoring in of new methods and new theoretical approaches, which can help us understand this past better. So that's it for now, and I would like to thank all my colleagues who have constituted part of our research team working on different aspects in truly interdisciplinary way, and also all the funding agencies, the state government of Tamil Nadu, ASI, and all the people who have contributed to these projects. So thank you very much. Akhilesh, you can just play a bit of each video and then we'll end. So I apologize for some problem with the slides, but this was what I wanted to speak about. Doesn't matter, few slides didn't show up. I hope you got the gist. So, for example, this little film is made by undergraduate students who are working with us as interns. They came from Kriya University. We won't play the whole thing, just it's a very simple, small film to explain what is a stone, what are stone tools for school students, for children. So, starting with what is prehistory, a little bit about the time scales involved, then a little few videos about different methods of making stone tools. So this is what these students have worked on, and they have been able to generate this. It's available freely on our YouTube channel, and it's been shared with schools and with teachers. So it gives you an overview of exploring stone tools. So you can have a look at that. And please, next video, Akhilesh. So this is available. So everything about stone tools for a school student or for a school teacher. Our current interns are sitting here and they are doing posters and a film on other aspects of stone tools for more senior students. The second film is not this, please. Please go to the XARC video. This video is also available on the website called XARC. We can, this one, Building Bridges Across Time and Space. And in this video, if you can go through towards the end, it gives you glimpses of the discipline of experimental archaeology that we are very deeply involved in. So everything related to Akhilesh's napping strategies, so you can just show a bit of that. And also on the experimental modules which we hold to teach and develop skills in university students, faculty and staff from various disciplines, not necessarily archaeology alone, but from various other disciplines, and also various programs, as you can see here. Let that run. Go back a bit, please. Yeah. Yes, here. Go a little bit back. So, okay, here. So, a little back. So, yes, where school children are taught excavation, for example. So here the children are, please go back. Yes, so from here, so for example, children are taught how to excavate mock trenches. These are all mock trenches in our campus. And so they realize that archaeologists are not doing PWD digging, but the systematic way in which you brush, in which you recover, in which you look at stone tools. All these aspects are conveyed to children, and they also learn how stone tools are made, and say for example how we make fire, or using of some models related to early agriculture or pottery or whatever it may be. All these aspects are inculcated in children from a very young age. So so this is one aspect of the work, and the other aspect of the work is obviously to target more senior students, that is college and university students. Can you please go to the end of the video? Somewhere towards, yeah, a little more towards the end. So, little more towards the end, please. Yeah, so these are for university and higher level students who undergo very intensive training in prehistory and lithic technology. So they get both theoretical and practical knowledge. And these modules have been done in-house all over Tamil Nadu, different parts of Tamil Nadu, different parts of India, across India. We even did in Sri Lanka, and for children we had a little stall in South Korea. So these are another aspect by which we hope to convey a love for prehistory of Tamil Nadu to different people from different backgrounds, different parts of different age groups, different educational levels, and different disciplines, not necessarily only archaeology. So these two videos are available, as I said, on our website and elsewhere on the internet, and we can share the links with you. So with that, I want to thank you for patiently listening, and thank you for inviting me to speak. Thank you. If there are any questions, I can. Yeah.
I think I speak for everyone. That was very elaborate, very wonderful presentation on prehistory, especially for someone who's not a specialist like me. I just have two questions that might seem very redundant to you, but I want to ask them anyway. My first question is about the beginning of your presentation.
Okay.
When you showed a huge distribution of sites
Yes.
over these 8,000 square kilometers. Thank you. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, very briefly of course, about the relationship between sites. Is that something that you imagine
Yes.
looking at in the future?
Yes, yes.
And my second question is more related to the second part, which is about agro-pastoralism and the so-called Neolithic. I was wondering if your research will eventually lead to the understanding of community building. Clearly, these efforts that they are making is very labor intensive, whether it's lifting huge boulders or, conducting agricultural activities.
Yes.
Clearly, there needs to be cooperation between minds in order to execute these actions. I was wondering if that's a future endeavor that you would like to pursue. Thank you.
Yes, these are great questions. Regarding your first question, that's really important because you have a clear, there was no time to go into it, but you have a clear patterning, if you may call it, in areas which have, in sites, localities which have only single culture sites. For example, only the Acheulean or only the late Paleolithic, and then you have certain complexes where you have the same site like Athirampakam occupied over through time through different cultural phases. So this is something which we have looked at, not only in terms, this is very important in terms of the geomorphology. For example, what are the processes leading to the preservation of sites, and what are the processes leading to the building up of sediments at different sites, which may also structure their visibility. So, for example, Acheulean sites are concentrated in the northwest part of the study region, and as you go further south, they become very, very sparse. So the reasons for that are not only linked to raw material availability, but also linked to preservation of sediments of that time period, and of course what we can see. So this is a very great question. We have published on this actually, which sites are multicultural, which sites are single culture, and what does that mean in terms of preferred regions of occupation or changing regions of occupation. So in the late Paleolithic, you have more coming further south rather than where the Acheulean is focused. So what is the reason for that? So all these questions we have factored in. Regarding the Neolithic, yes, this is a crucial issue because it is not only manufacture, and it's also large scale manufacture and distribution over vast areas, and you have to factor in things like social stratification now, hierarchies of organization of the social structure, interaction between communities which may be very far spaced out. For example, this forms a sort of a continuum which what is being seen by Professor Korisetta and his team in Bellary. So what is the links from in Krishnagiri, Dharmapuri and Salem with other areas somewhere maybe further out? This can be tracked sometimes by the provenance of the raw materials used and by the, of course, the spatial distribution of sites. So these are questions which we are certainly thinking about, and this is only a beginning we have made. So the paper is in peer review. I hope it comes through. I don't know, but anyway, this is the beginning of this new research project. Thank you. Thank you. So thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for this wonderful session. This is a small token of our love. Vote of thanks by Yashaswini.
On behalf of the State Department of Tamil Nadu, I'd like to thank Professor Shanti Papu and Dr. Kumar Akhilesh for this wonderful lecture on new perspectives in prehistory. Yes, indeed, this lecture has given us a new perspective and a holistic approach on what prehistory is, and it is not just study of tools and how applicable it is for the present, and it meets the past and the present for our future. So we also saw about the paleoenvironmental studies, various hypotheses, and then finally cultural and heritage management, which is very important for the protection of sites. So I also have to thank the technical team of Tamil Virtual Academy and the commissioner of our department and our staffs. Thank you.
Natuppan.